Thanks very much for staying online during the break. I have just a small announcement to make. Mr. Šebek is going to moderate this session as well. Unfortunately, our colleague from Macedonia could not join.
I know you were keen to get rid of me, but that's not going to be the case now. I hope you use this as a bathroom break or to top up your coffee as I did. Warm welcome to Lavdim Hamidi, to Nikola Burazer, to Stavros Malihoudis, and once again to Goran Igic. Our topic now is a different one, but very much related, and I think we touched upon a lot of issues in the previous panel. The topic is how to tackle challenges to regional cooperation of the media and how to tackle challenges to media freedom. Challenges in this case being a euphemism to the word problem or problems. I don't know if you've had any arrangements with the planned moderator. Did you plan on any opening statements, or maybe we can just improvise the opening statements and start? I'll kick off with the way that you're lined up on my screen. So Lavdim, hello and welcome. Would you care to say, to sort of bring the topic onto the table for us?
Hello to everyone, and nice to meet you, all of you, virtually. I will start to speak something about, first about media situation in Kosovo, and then which are real challenges to media freedom among the Western Balkan countries. Kosovo ranks 70th in the world in terms of press freedom. International and local reports reflect the real unsatisfactory state of media freedom in Kosovo. The continuing instability of media, where like almost everything else in the country, it remains divided along ethnic lines. Access to information is often limited to one ethnic or political group, with most media outlets reporting mainly on issues related to their nationality. Some of the common concerns are physical and verbal attacks on journalists, cyber attacks and on online media, and a lack of transparency regarding media ownership. According to the Reporters Without Borders Index, many media outlets in Kosovo do not have financial sustainability, which makes them sensitive to political influences, and this often results in self-censorship. Media situation is becoming even worse with the pandemic, where commercial revenues to media drop. Several media outlets are on the verge of existing, surviving largely on foreign donations. We don't know what the future brings, but honestly, it feels like nothing is going to be the same. And which are real challenges to media freedom among Western Balkan countries? High rate of speech, often coming from politicians and addressing precisely to the media, political influence over media regulatory authorities, lack of transparency of media ownership, poor quality of investigative journalism, weak mechanism to support media associations, targeted attacks on online media, partial and inconsistent implementation of the legislative framework, which in addition is not always aligned with European standards.
Thank you very much, Lavdim. We're turning now towards Nikola Burazer. Nikola, you heard Lavdim's list of complaints about the flaws in the media freedoms in Kosovo. Was he talking about Kosovo or was he talking about Serbia? To the best of my knowledge, every single problem Lavdim mentioned exists in Serbia as well.
Well, absolutely. I think that basically what we see in all Western Balkan countries is the same set of problems when it comes to media freedom. Maybe in some countries, some problems are more, let's say, more visible than other ones. But basically, I believe that we generally face the same challenges. Now, when it comes to Serbia, I think there's a very, very long list of problems we could talk about that are plaguing media freedom. My personal opinion in Serbia, we actually have something which could be described as media capture. because it's not only a question of whether media are free to report on what they would maybe like to report. We do have a number of media outlets who are, let's say, completely independent in their work, which produce good quality journalism from different civil society or owned media, such as these investigative portals, which actually do very good work, very good research, and they do have the possibility to do that to other electronic media who do provide citizens with information, and who are, despite some problems which maybe we could touch upon later, are able to basically send their message to the citizens. But the problem is, how visible are these media? Who controls distribution of media? Who controls the market of advertisements? Who controls the funds, and who gets the funds from the state, which are given to the media? And all of this basically creates an atmosphere and a situation where basically a very small number of media are actually able to survive on the market. It's not a coincidence that most of the media which I mentioned as producing good quality work are those who are basically depending on EU and other international grants, and are not commercially able to survive. And even these other independent media, which may be commercial in nature, would probably not survive on the Serbian market without also getting some of these projects from abroad. So this is, I think, the biggest problem which we face in Serbia, and then most of other problems somehow stem from this. My organization has recently done a research on state of democracy in Serbia. We do these yearly reports which concern the state of democracy and freedom of media in Serbia. We have actually just presented this year's report, and what we see in the past year is that things are becoming even worse than was the case in previous years. When you look at the international indexes, those which observe media freedom, Serbia is on a downward trend. Serbia now finds itself in the ultimate or penultimate place when it comes to ranking of Western Balkan countries on media freedom, and it just depends which index do you look at. You will see whether Serbia is the last or just one place before last, and the trend is obviously downward. When you look at the number of attacks on journalists, when you look at how dangerous it is to be a journalist in Serbia, especially now, we have seen this year in these protests in July, a large number of violent attacks on journalists by the police forces and by some demonstrators, which are, let's say, suspected of, in a way, being aligned with
the government. The downward trend is actually, Stavros, can I ask you for a bit of patience, because I'd like to come to Goran Igic, because Nikola was talking about the freedom index and how Serbia has been slipping down. Actually, all the countries have been slipping down, apart from North Macedonia. Goran, the North Macedonian media, assessment of the media in North Macedonia is the only one which is actually positive over the last couple of years.
Yes. Okay,
is it a well-deserved?
Yeah,
I'm expecting you.
I know.
Is it a well-deserved? Is it well-deserved or not?
It's a very hard question to answer, as well as all the topics today. We were discussing something that had also a very difficult question to answer in the previous panel. But from my personal opinion, it's a result of the political change. And it is really actually a normal process. We had this. It's a repetitive process. When the government of Branko Crvenkovski fell out of power, this was like 20 years ago. First thing that was discussed in the media sphere was that we can feel more freedom of the press because of that change. I got to know that this is a process. That is a technical process, actually, for the new government to take things in control. This is the time needed. So yes, probably the better rank. We are 92nd, I think, now on the Reports Without Borders list. I think that it is, it's probably well deserved, but it's what is about to happen and what is started happening.
That was my next question. That was my next question. Namely, Goran, what I heard from a colleague from Skopje, when I asked him sort of what's the state of the media, he said, well, the media are free now. However, the government has not abolished any of the levers it can use to control the media. It is simply not using them. But they have not been removed from the legislative process. In other words, the instruments for controlling the media still exist. They're just not being used at the moment. Is that the case?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I'm not an expert on the topic. I cannot be completely precise, but what I can say, because I am a journalist, I'm a media maker and actually even a media owner, but what I can say is my perception is that things are changing, because as we spoke in the previous panel, things are changing because the media sphere is changing, and because we have facts such as subsidized media. That says a lot about the regions that we live in. It's really hard to be to have freedom of speaking if you're depending on the government. So in that manner, a lot of the instrument exists. For an example, we had recently the Fund for Innovation in the country giving money for starting a print. In the time where print media is facing great challenges on how to reinvent itself, we had the Fund of Innovation giving money to a print media to make a printing office.
Printed media.
There's nothing innovative in making a print. Not the media, but the print itself. This is an innovative program. So the only answer for me there is that this is the instrument for control. We are giving you the money to make your own print. That way we're going to subsidize you making more of these newspapers, and that way you will how repay us. Why are they choosing this one?
Maybe it is 3D print, who knows? Let's give them a chance. Stavros, thank you for being so patient. You're the only one participant coming from an EU country, actually. So maybe it'll be interesting, having heard what Lavdim and Nikola and Goran were talking about. Can you give us maybe an outsider's perspective? First of all, what's the situation like in Greece, and how do you perceive us over here in the Western Balkans?
Sure. I mean, maybe I come from an EU country, but like the more I hear the discussions and also the previous panel, I feel like we're a small neighborhood here in the Balkans, and many of the experiences that other colleagues shared, they are quite similar. Nicola's description of how things are in Serbia, I think if we took out the name of Serbia and put Greece, many of them would be quite similar. I would say that regarding press freedom, we don't have the cases of danger like in, I don't know, what we saw in Slovakia or Malta. We don't have this kind of stuff. There are attacks on photojournalists or reporters. There are threats against them, but I wouldn't say like in as big level as we have seen in other countries. But what happens here a lot, it's also also similar to what Nicola said, is that we have some forms of censorship, and one could be like the examples mentioned by Goran, like who gets the state money and who gets the state assistance. We didn't have the innovation giving newspapers innovation money, but we have a list to support media companies during the coronavirus. And this was a very, very obvious case where supporters of the government were given way more money than they should according to, you know, the readership or the readership pretty much. The other form of censorship is that journalists, they do know that they have to censor themselves in some cases. So most of the major media, they belong to 4 or 5 super rich families. So somebody working for this newspaper or this TV channel will not maybe have his supervisor or his editor-in-chief come and say, don't do that, but he will know on himself or herself that he should or she should bother with other topics. That works also in the other way, that you have media organizations attacking each other, so they would represent the owners' interests. That's one thing of press restriction. the main concern is how to tackle this. It's what Nicola said also before. It's smaller media organizations usually getting EU or other grants because they wouldn't have a chance in the open market, in the advertisement market. They wouldn't have a chance to financially support themselves and survive. So I would say that the sector is very centralized, big media organizations with newspapers, radio, channels, taking state money and support and advertisement money. And then you have smaller initiatives that do manage to do good investigative work. But then again, it's the big question of how many people does this work reach and this information, because I have seen in the past year some really, really big investigations, like revealing important things about business owners, about big names in the country. But it's very important where it gets published. So if they are published in a small outlet, usually there will be no outcome.
There'll be no.
And just a very, very short thing I would like just to mention very briefly is that we have a very famous case. It's called the Nur one. It's one ship that was found with approximately 3 tons of heroin in the port of Piraeus. This has been an underreported topic quite much in the Greek media in some level. So last month there was a big report in an American magazine about it, which gave all the detail and all the depth and the background that Greek media didn't manage to do, because the person that is reported to be affiliated with the ship is also a very big media owner. So you have other media from other parts of the world covering a very, very Greek story. That's it.
Lovely. Stavros mentioned and Nicola also mentioned self-censorship. How much of a problem is self-censorship? You know, not waiting for the editor or the owner to tell you do this or do that, or don't do this or don't do that, but rather censoring yourself. Due to there's been a tremendous fall in the incomes of journalists and the financial status of the media, and that certainly makes journalists probably more aware, and tends to put them in danger of self-censoring themselves. Is that a problem in Kosovo?
Self-censorship is a big problem, not just in Kosovo, but all in Balkan countries. We know that governments want to control media, especially Balkan leaders. But in Kosovo, even though we have a lot of complaints, we are somewhere in better position with region. Not because we are better journalists, but international community here played a very good role in Kosovo. And we had a case with files from special court in Kosovo with no one media published that files which were disclosed from war veterans. And because we had a lot of files from war witnesses, and we could put in risk them. And what they have done, they published some of files in Albanian media, because no one media in Kosovo published.
Nicola, censorship, in his essay on censorship, Umberto Eco, about 10 years ago, he wrote that there was a time when the censor was a physical person walking into a physical office and cutting out the bits which the censor did not want to get published. That was in the times of Mussolini, that was, says Eco. Today we live in an era where basically governments use a different methodology, says Eco. Instead of sort of stopping us from publishing something, they drown us in completely irrelevant, unimportant information, creating a noise which then sort of kills practically the really relevant issues that the government does not want to see in the media. Is that also the case in Serbia? Is that a problem? The relevance of so-called news?
Yeah, well, I certainly think that there is not much censorship in Serbian or Western Balkans media, not in that way which could be maybe imagined 20, 30, or a couple of 100 years ago. I mean, nobody actually, looks at what journalists have written and then arrests them the next day because of what they have written. It maybe does happen on occasions, but this is not the biggest problem. Self-censorship, of course, is one of the bigger problems because media and journalists are quite concerned about what might happen to them if they dig too deep or dig somewhere where they shouldn't be digging. And we have seen lots of examples of this. One way is, of course, putting pressure on journalists through different smear campaigns. We even saw one arrest of a journalist here in Serbia during the state of emergency in April. And yes, this is a very serious problem. We have seen some media outlets basically being targeted by tax authorities, obviously selectively because of how they write. And allegedly, it's all according to the law, right? So there is no censorship there. You write whatever you want, and you get a tax inspection the next day, and the tax inspection stays for 3 months, and it never goes there where the media are not writing some kind of stories like this. So this is one way that we could see this kind of censorship. Other, which you rightfully described as making this news irrelevant, is definitely something which authorities do to somehow make these stories irrelevant. We here have in Serbia from these independent outlets, which I mentioned earlier, lots of stories of serious corruption cases, which in, let's say, a fully functional democratic state would be immediately prosecuted or there be some kind of investigation from the state authorities. In Serbia, it just completely gets lost in the noise. And yes, but this is the way the entire media sphere works. So you have these professional media who are doing their job, but then you have 10 times more media whose job is to muddy the water, to deny these claims, and to target these media and journalists as foreign spies, mercenaries, traitors, and you have the whole list of words used. This is the way how censorship works. And then when you have this kind of system, then naturally you're going to have most journalists and media organizations who are to say, okay, we better stay within a certain line. We do not want all of these trouble. We can maybe just accuse the government of something here and something there, but we will not do it too much, because if we do it too much, then we have the whole machinery on us. And then you create a system where everybody thinks in this way, and only those who are independent completely from these sources of revenue, such as income from the state, or even advertisement revenue, can actually afford to be completely independent and disregard these mechanisms the state uses.
Let's stay a little bit with the topic of financing, with the topic of funding. In Serbia, Nicola, at the request of the European Commission, the state got out of media ownership. So over the last 10 years or so, basically the government, the state, pulled out of media ownership. Most of these media are local media, radio and television stations, newspapers, etc., etc. They were privatized. As a rule, they were privatized in a way which meant that the new owners were very closely linked to the government. And although the state cannot directly fund them, it can indirectly fund them through program grants. And that has become a major instrument of pressure upon the media in Serbia. Is that the same situation in North Macedonia, Goran, in Kosovo, Lavdim? Greece, I presume, is slightly different, but let's start with Goran.
As I said earlier, yeah, it's like governments have learned the lesson, especially here in Macedonia, after the ruling of 11 years of ruling of the right-oriented party of Nikola Gruevski, that the civil society is very important. The unfortunate thing is that they did not try to empower the civil society, give more voice or strength in the public discourse. They just wanted it for their own benefit. So what we are continuing to do is we are developing the methods of how to control media, or how to, as the colleague said, make them self-control or self-censor themselves. Now today you have governments, especially in the Balkans, that are acting as donors. So you have the Ministry of Culture giving grant to media, you have the Ministry of Informatics, you have the Ministry of Defense engaging people
and municipality and municipalities as well.
The municipal level is even more complicated, because here in Macedonia there is the government is forbidden by the law to give commercials to the mainstream media, but the local governments are not. So we have that instrument. So now we actually have the central government putting things on the agenda of media through the local governments. So yeah, it's very difficult, and we are only helping in this as the media sphere, and unfortunately also the donors.
Talking about donors, Goran, hang on. We have a question from Anthony. It says, if a media outlet is funded by an international donor, to what extent does this negatively affect the credibility in the eyes of the media consumers, listeners, readers? So if we're not talking about the government as the donor, but if we're talking about a foreign institution, an international donor, does this lower the credibility in the eyes of the public at large?
By my opinion, not. Because it's, I think that in the end is the content you're serving. You can be marked as a media who got the money from USAID, let's say. But if you're different from the media who did not even got money from the USAID, but they're trying to, to be sympathiczny. I really don't know the word in English. I'm sorry.
Nice.
Yes. To flirt with the donors. Well, we have Macedonia has a very plastic situation. We have an agreement with Greece that I'm not going to get into because that's not my point. But it's very clear. Journalists do not have to use the North Macedonia name. We can say Macedonia, and we have media competing who will use the name North Macedonia in everyday life in our country, where we have different rules every day, and thousands of cases like this. So this is only a recipe for more bias and more polarization in the society.
Are these media Greek funded? Are these media Greek funded?
No, they're not.
Okay, Lavdim. International aid to media in Kosovo, does that bring down the credibility of such media or not? There is a lot of media assistance in the whole of the Western Balkans, by the way.
Also, international help to media dropped a lot since 2000, but this situation, Kosovo is in 17th place, and is the result of international help to media in Kosovo. We have a lot of problems, actually. I wrote several scandals about telecom, and no one media wrote about that scandal because they're receiving money from telecom. But if you have any support from international community, you are free to write what you want or what you see as negative. And it is not seen as something bad if you receive international funds to media, I think.
Nicola, the media that you work for, one of your jobs, the European Western Balkans, is almost entirely foreign funded. So do you get the label of being the fifth column, the traitor?
Well, depending from whom. I mean, you obviously do have this problem in Serbia that all civil society organizations and media who get funded from abroad are labeled as foreign mercenaries, etc., etc. So this is actually something which damages our credibility in the eyes of one part of the public. Of course, you have this other part of the public which understands the situation, understands that, you know, the nature of these grants, etc., etc. But, you know, you always have these labels being thrown around for the last 30 years, basically from the time of Milosevic, which does do a lot of damage to the credibility of these media. But the problem is that even those media who are maybe not funded from abroad, who just happen to have a pro-Western approach, are also branded as pro-Western and foreign mercenary, etc., etc. So maybe that sense doesn't do more damage than would be the case even if there was no foreign funding, just based on the way the media works and how it basically depicts government policy, etc., etc. I just wanted to add something. You mentioned the Serbian case and the Serbian reform. I think the Serbian reform is maybe the worst example of what could be done with good intentions, because what we had previously is publicly owned media who were controlled and financed by the local municipalities or the city of Belgrade or the state. After the reform, we basically now have privately owned media who are also financed by the state and local authorities, but this time they're in private hands, so there is absolutely no accountability except the fact that they have to apply for these grants, and it is well designed. There should be competent people in these commissions. They should award the money based on the quality of the grant, of the project proposal, etc. But we do not see that. We see media who were just founded, like, let's say, a month before the call was open, or maybe some companies which are not even dealing with media at all, who just change their let's say, the statuses, and they just apply for the grants and get them. And this is basically the end result. So you had
looking at the bright side of things, looking at the bright side of things, Nicola, the possibility for corruption is much greater now.
Yes. I mean, you have less accountability. You could have addressed the issue, let's say, before the reform. Why does this media does this or does that? Now you can no longer do that because the media are private. They have, okay, of course they have to, you know, there are some standards you have to stick to, but they can always say, well, we are private media, we can publish the stories we want to publish, but they still get the same money from us as taxpayers.
And another sort of very important thing is that actually most of these media were bought by private individuals or companies who had nothing to do with media work before. They were in, you know, mining or sales or whatever, but all of them were pretty close to the government, whether the local government or the central government.
Yes, absolutely. This is exactly what we could see, and now basically a majority of media in Serbia are in the hands of private persons who are close to the ruling party, and this is one of the strongest mechanisms of media control that exists in Serbia.
Stavros, you mentioned also that ownership was not really all that transparent and was very, very concentrated in Greece. I know that similar situation in Albania as well, in most other countries. How much is this of a problem? How much of a problem is this?
The first problem is what you mentioned before, that most of those media owners, they don't have a tradition in publishing. They don't have such standards. From what I'm hearing from older colleagues, you know, the previous owners used to have some ethics, some approach. They were first publishers and then they were businessmen. Now they are first businessmen and they become publishers, you know, to help their business. I would say it is like professionally, if you want to work in the media, it surely is a problem. We're talking about the majority of the market, the majority of the maybe okay paying jobs, and of a maybe okay readership. What we are seeing in the past years is, you know, journalists have to kind of flee those media and create their own media, their own organizations. But this is, again, what I said before, it's very limited, and they have very limited resources, capacities, readerships, influence. So for the moment, I would say that the majority of the people, and especially if we talk about older ages, they still have sticked with the traditional media. Traditional media still have influence on them, on their views, on how they will approach things. And I wouldn't say that a young journalist has many options on where he or she could work. I would say that the chances are quite limited, and especially if we talk about chances that, you know, you have a salary and you can survive, you can pay the bills for the month.
Let's turn a little bit towards the other part of our panel, to our other panel topic, which is regional cooperation. We've neglected it a little bit so far. Lavdim, how would you rate the level of regional cooperation? Good, bad, terrible, wonderful? In the media, we're talking about regional cooperation in the media sphere, obviously.
Rate as a bad, not as good, because we don't have any cooperation which should have been until now. The problem is language between the medias. A lot of Serbian medias do not understand Albanian medias, also from Kosovo. Until now, telling frankly, is not the good situation regarding regional cooperation. We should have more bilateral and cross-border cooperation in improving media freedoms and joint action in solidarity to protect professional rights of journalists.
Nicola, your media, your organization, European Western Balkans, has the ambition of being the regional media. So presumably in order to do that, you must have developed very good links to the media in different countries. So are you an example of excellent regional cooperation?
Well, thank you for your comment. If this is your observation, from the very beginning, we have attempted to not only bring the news, let's say, from the Western Balkans to Brussels and other EU capitals, or from Brussels and the EU to the Western Balkan countries, but also to bring the news from different Western Balkan countries to the other Western Balkan countries, so that people in Serbia who read our news would maybe understand better what is going on in Kosovo, in Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and vice versa. And in that regard, I think we have been successful in achieving this goal. And yes, we have established, I would say, good cooperation with different media outlets around the Western Balkan countries. And yes, it could be done. I think there is a lot of space for this regional cooperation. I think we need more regional media. Basically, the only regional media which we have are those who are let's say, funded from state sources of other countries. We don't really have any or very few regional commercial media, which maybe would be able to reach a much bigger number of citizens of Western Balkan countries. And this is something which would be really beneficial for regional cooperation as such, could be beneficial for the EU accession process, could be beneficial for reconciliation, etc., etc. But there has to be, let's say, some kind of maybe support from those international organizations and donors which are interested in regional cooperation. Creating regional media or networks of media is something which I think would be quite successful in the long term. But of course, there are some obstacles to it, financial ones above all.
Goran, what are the benefits and what are the downsides of, let's say, a regional media outlet that Nicola has just been mentioning? There are none, to the best of my knowledge. There are organizations which connect the dots, but I do not know of any actual regional media outlet. If we leave aside what, as Nicola mentioned, I don't know, Deutsche Welle, Russia Today, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. The BBC doesn't have anymore, it just has a website in Serbia.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like BBC News something.
Yeah.
Here also, it's like here also, they had a radio office, I think they don't have it anymore. It's really difficult for me to answer this, since I have not been on the side of representing a regional media. Our office is regional, but and our work with the foundation and media literacy, tackling disinformation, debate, etc., is regional, but our work with our media it's national. So we're covering only Macedonia and sometimes examples from the region, and we're trying for that to be good examples. I guess it's hard because it's a very complex process and job, and it has to involve a lot of people. And we live in a time where we see that the journalists who are covering topics from local cities that are not the capital, let's say in the case of Macedonia, most of the print media and TV stations had journalists reporting almost in every city. Today, that's not the case, and this is all driven by the financing challenge, and also another challenge which was part of the discussion on today's panels, and that is living in the media sphere that we live in and the media sphere we created. For an example, just to illustrate, in Macedonia, last year we only had 8 students enrolling for the journalism studies. We used to have 300, 400, etc. So things are changing, and I'm not sure today also if an idea for a media who will cover regional topics is doable, because as we saw, every one of us is a media on its own, and we are all already covering some of the stuff in that way. So it's going to be more and more difficult to unite under one idea. And I can see that also through our regional cooperation. We have it, but it's very difficult. In the end, it all comes up to the point that you have to have understanding for your partners, because they have something more urgent that will give the salary to the whole team.
Goran, talking about this, we have another question from Anthony, the most active of our attendees. Talking about regional cooperation, he says there is a theory that cooperation can only really happen if it is for the purpose of a fundamental interest or for countering a fundamental threat. If these are absent, says Anthony, then cooperation would be nice to have it, but it's not really sustainable or important. What could these fundamental interests or fundamental threats be that could strengthen regional cooperation in the media?
Sometimes, if I can continue, and then I'll finish very, very soon. Sometimes I would say that it's also to guess the moment. For an example, we published a story about captured trees. We targeted it regionally, and we had a lot of, surprisingly, a lot of answers in our inbox from Kosovo, from Serbia. People from Novi Sad were sending us photos of trees that are captured under the concrete. This is not a fundamental topic, but it is a very essential one, and it's probably in the right momentum when Corona pandemic kind of is falling out of the agenda. Not completely, unfortunately it's going to return, but we kind of had the time to take a breath and remember that just before the Corona we were dealing with the polluted air. So yes, it's a fundamental question, but it's also a question that we up to now we treated as non-existing, but it moved people around. We have more than 200 photos of people reporting that they have a local problem and trees are captured in their cities. So we also have to communicate with the public and to feel and to sense what is next to be on the agenda, and not to be afraid to experiment and to be wrong. And when you have a challenge of financing, it's really hard to experiment and also to be wrong. We're afraid what we're going to say.
Nicola, is the pandemic this kind of a fundamental threat that can assist regional cooperation? And is there a fundamental interest for regional cooperation in the media sphere?
Well, we have discussed the issue of media freedom. Maybe this is one of the fundamental threats that could, let's say, support regional cooperation of media. We have here discussed about many problems media face throughout the Western Balkans. And there are certain networks of media or networks of journalist associations which are functional. And this is something that they could maybe do to address this fundamental threat that every single media in these countries face. And this is maybe advocacy on the European level, maybe to get some support from the European Union to the media. This is something where I think media in the region should really unite to have a common voice, to express their concerns. Maybe some kind of regional media funding schemes from the European Union would be beneficial, because right now the European Union, most of its funds go to individual countries. Yes, they support a lot of media, but these calls are local, they're national, they're not regional. Maybe the EU supporting these regional networks could in a way then address both the issues which we here discussed. So the threat of lack of media freedom or media control, and on the other hand, supporting regional cooperation. I also here see the question from Aida about N1 and Al Jazeera. Yes, they're good examples. Al Jazeera is, I believe, maybe the only media which has only one channel which everybody watches, because they have just one version of the website for the entire region. N1 has 3 different websites, so people from Serbia rarely actually see anything that was on air in the Bosnian version of N1 or Zagreb version of N1. But definitely it's also, I think, a step in a good direction. I think after these media were launched, we now have a much better understanding of what's going on in other countries than we used to have. And maybe N1 and Al Jazeera prove that there is potential in this approach.
but there is a problem. These media, both N1 and Al Jazeera, are cable only. And if you look at the audience figures throughout the Western Balkans, they reach an audience which equals the level of a statistical mistake. So, and also they cover, each of them covers the 3 countries, Bosnia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia. Doesn't go beyond that. Lavdim, how much is language a problem when we are speaking about regional cooperation? I mean, this panel about the Western Balkans and regional media cooperation and threats, etc., we're doing it in English. Do we need English language media in order to be able to have a proper regional media?
Yes, I said language is very problem, and that's why N1 and or Al Jazeera, they have just one journalist in Pristina, one correspondent, and I don't know if they have enough audience because of language, because they transmit it in Serbian or Bosnian language. The people who know Serbian language or Bosnian language are very small group of people because young generation mostly know Albanian as mother language or English, and they do not speak Serbian or Bosnian language.
Stavros, Greek is even more of a problem. I mean, for people from Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and even North Macedonia, we can understand each other either very easily or with a little bit of difficulties. With Greek, it's a mega problem, and vice versa. The same thing goes. None of us here can follow the Greek media, nor can you follow the media from the Western Balkans. Any solutions to offer apart from English as the lingua franca?
No, I think that's the only case. Like that's the only solution. Like there's a big gap. We don't understand any of the other Balkan languages. You don't understand ours. So how it usually has worked in previous, I don't know, like cross-border cooperation is that I would have, for example, Bulgarian colleagues translate their text, and I would translate mine in English, and then we would try to find some common routes. But I do agree that there's a big gap there that makes it more difficult to cooperate. But from the journalist perspective, I think most of the people nowadays, they do have good knowledge of English, maybe some other language too. So maybe they can take this burden on them and deliver the work.
Stavros, whilst we have you here, let's go once again back to the issue of media freedoms. At the beginning of this panel, we sort of all moaned and groaned about how terrible the state of the media freedoms is in our region. Any solutions? We've touched upon some potential solutions, but sort of, do you see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, or is it getting darker and darker?
I'm not sure about solutions. The only thing I would do as a journalist is to have my story backed up as much as possible, and you can consult lawyers before you publish something that could be sensitive. You can take care as much as you can, because the other way that is usually used here, I guess in many other Balkan countries also, is that, for example, the big guys would sue you repeatedly, and I think that
bankrupt you.
Yeah, that's the way. And then if it's your case, you would have trouble. But if you work for some other media, also your boss at some point would get tired and would say, stop creating problem to me, because they will have to pay so much money for the legal fees. For this, I think the only solution always is when you somehow manage to bring into the story also European or international focus. I think that's one way that can work as a shield for you, when you can bring, for example, if you, investigate a case of, human rights abuses, and then you have to face the state, and the state is, fighting you, let's use this term. When you bring into it European bodies and independent European bodies, it can, you can get the assistance that you didn't have before, and you can have this extra strength that you as a local media with small readership and even less capacities, you wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
We have an expert here in these issues, Irena Stevic, who will be summing up our panels later on, working for the Insider program. She's got lots of experience on all kinds of pressures. Would you like to jump in, even though you're not on the panel, Irena? Unmute, in case you do, please unmute.
Yeah. Well, we have experiences of all kinds, but I wouldn't say that there was like censorship, if I may say, because I think that, well, everybody knows that it's useless. But as you all know, the author and the chief editor of Insider has lived many years with police protection, exactly. And it was really an experience that changes you. You become maybe more cautious about things, and but it doesn't stop you, if you know what I mean. What we do is being very we're trying to cooperate with as many as colleagues as we can to exchange experience, like it gives us some kind of warning system of what might happen. And in that sense, I think the cooperation is very important, because there are similar mechanism of pressure in the region, not only in the region, in the world. So you can predict some situations. So I think that there is not enough, actually, cooperation between journalists. I don't know what's the problem, maybe the lack of time or something like that, because I think it's very useful, because not only the mechanism of pressure are the same or similar, but also the mechanism of corruption. And I think that the exchange of experience can help us do our job better and to protect ourselves better. So I think that we should find some more time, or maybe to have one person to do that kind of job.
Thank you, Irena. And we have about 6 minutes left, and we have a question from, I hope I'm not going to mispronounce the name terribly, Elias Pogani. What is the role of the regional media cooperation in countering ethno-nationalism and nationalist rhetoric, fostering coexistence? The nationalist rhetoric was the topic of the first panel, but maybe we can look now at regional cooperation as one of the solutions towards dealing with this ethnocentric nationalism. Lavdim, would that help?
Yes, would that help a lot? Only regional cooperation would improve the freedom in all Balkan countries, and it would be better. As I know, I don't know any media which are present in all countries in the region. There are a few of them, and we need to have more presence in the region, not in our country.
Nicola, can this happen? How do we make this happen?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I find regional cooperation of media quite a useful tool for achieving reconciliation, and yes, let's say, going against this kind of nationalist rhetoric. And this is because providing the consumers of media content with stories of how some issues are perceived from the other side, or how are they perceived in other countries, can definitely help break this pattern.
Circle.
Exactly, where you have media who basically look at all these very complex issues from one side. They just bombard the consumers with this kind of approach, and then this happens on, let's say, on both sides or all sides in Western Balkans. And then basically these people, even though they discuss the same problem, they have completely different information, they have completely different view on things, and they don't even know how the other side even perceives that. Even just seeing how the other side perceives some problems could be beneficial in breaking this pattern. So I think this is also one of the reasons why the EU, if it's interested in reconciliation and EU accession, should invest funds in this particular field. There was this issue of language. Should it be in English, or, because we have these linguistic differences? I think English is not really a good strategy to reach wider audiences. I mean, this is coming from somebody who is editor of an English language portal. We do not even try to actually reach a wider audience with our English articles directly. This is not just, it's simply the fact that a lot of citizens do not speak English, and even those who do will not that frequently actually open articles in English on a daily basis. What is better to actually to translate the content, or to achieve cooperation between media who are going to translate the content. Like, this is what we do. Like, we rely on different media around the Western Balkans who are going to use our content, translate it, and this is how we're going to reach the wider audience. So having just the media in English, which has content which is protected, which nobody can translate, this is something which I think would not help reach a wider audience, and therefore achieve the goals of regional cooperation and reconciliation.
Thank you very much. Stavros, you have the last word, and we have a question from Alexandra Dimitrova, but it's on the longish side. I will leave that question for the next panel. Stavros, can you tell us, does the Greek audience get a perception from the Greek media about the view from the other side, what Nicola was talking about? Do you get to hear perceptions coming from North Macedonia or Kosovo or Albania or Bosnia and Herzegovina?
I would say that, especially when it comes to our relationships with the neighbors in the Balkan Peninsula, I would say that our information is pretty much limited to what specific Greek media report. This was the case for example, in the agreement with North Macedonia. People get informed from very specific sources. Even those journalists that report for this media have some very, very specific information on their own. So I would say that it's very limited. Like what you would maybe call as I don't know, the common opinion on some issues. It's in very big part structured and influenced by mainly TV channels, the major TV channels. I wouldn't say that the regional media, they do have power to report or to influence too much the minds of their audiences. So especially in things that have to do with the Balkans, or I would say also, I would give the example also with Turkey, that we have some tensions lately, the past months. In very, very, very big level, all the information that we get, I mean, especially the older ages, comes from traditional established media. It's in a very big percentage, I would say. I realized that, like, talking with, I don't know, family members, older people, it's what they will see in the night TV news program. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stavros. And we've run out of time. It's 12:30 actually. As happens to be the case, we've raised lots of questions. We have not necessarily provided all the answers, but then at the end of the day, that's how they describe a journalist: a person who knows all the questions and very, very, very few answers. Thank you very much. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then I see that Aida Cherkes is present. She's the moderator of the next panel, so good, I'll be able to take a break. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for participating and for tuning in. See you in 15 minutes.